Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this second plenary session of the International USR Summit 2022, themed Education and Action for a Sustainable Future. This plenary session focuses on assessing and reinforcing USR impacts. I'm Lara Johannsdottir, professor and an academic director of the Environment and Natural Resources graduate program at the University of Iceland. I also act as the head of the University of Iceland Sustainability Committee. When focusing on how to assess and reinforce USR impacts, it is relevant to discuss whether to measure what counts or count what is measured. Universities worldwide are shifting their missions to focus more on their social responsibilities and the public good. But do we have the right metrics, frameworks in place to capture, reward, and incentivize universities' social and economic impact? Are universities still too focused on chasing research prestige and reputation metrics? How do institutions of higher education fulfill their public purpose? In this interactive session, representatives of two organizations at the vanguard of data-driven sector analysis, Times Higher Education and the American Council on Education, outline separate initiatives designed to measure, benchmark, and incentivize universities' social responsibility and public purpose, helping to redefine excellence in the world of higher education and research and drive the social responsibility agenda. We will start this session by listening to two short presentations from our panelists. I will then, as the moderator, ask them a few questions related to the topic before a brief Q&A session. Our distinguished guests are Mr. Phil Baty from Times Higher Education and Dr. Marisol Morales from Carnegie Elective Classifications, American Council on Education. Times Higher Education is responsible for, as stated on their website, ranking of universities based on calibrated performance indicators that measures the institution's performance across four areas, which are teaching, research, knowledge transfer, and international outlook. But Phil will explain the role of Times Higher Education in his talk. The Carnegie Elective Classifications are managed on behalf of the Carnegie Foundation by an Elective Classification Central Office at the American Council on Education, ACE. In addition to the elective classifications, ACE administers the Carnegie Foundation all-inclusive universal basic classification based on secondary analysis of existing national data, which we will learn more about during Marisol's presentation. Mr. Phil Baty will start, but he is the Chief Knowledge Officer at Times Higher Education. Phil has over 25 years of experience in international higher education performance management and strategy, including a decade as editor of the prestigious Times Higher Education World University Rankings from 2009 until 2019. He currently runs Times Higher Education's Global Leadership Summits and heads up government relations. Phil's presentation is titled Times Higher Education's Impact Rankings, Redefine Excellence in Global Higher Education to Promise Social Responsibility. So go ahead, Phil.
Thank you very much, Laura, for that introduction. I'm delighted to join you here from London. So we're very well known for the World University Rankings, as you say. They're seen as the gold standard in measuring research excellence, traditional research-intensive universities. But I think it's time for a disruption to the landscape of university rankings, and I'm delighted to introduce the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, which are gaining extraordinary traction in the sector globally. There has been a sense, I think, of a great reckoning facing higher education. Fernando Ramirez, the Harvard professor who led on the UNESCO International Commission on Education, on the futures of education, talked to Times Higher Education about this idea of a great reckoning. He said, in recent decades, certainly in places like the UK, in the US, the public and politicians are asking, what good do universities do for society? Who do universities serve? And he said he thinks this is causing a reckoning within the higher education community, perhaps of comparable significance to the reckoning that led to the last major transformation of the university after the Second World War, a major moment of truth for universities. And I think the time is absolutely right for universities to focus hard on this issue of public good, of societal good. We are seeing extraordinary societal challenge. Before the pandemic kicked in and changed the world forever, we were seeing the increasing effects of climate change. We're seeing some massive existential challenges facing the world. Obviously, leaders are in Egypt right now at COP27, and we're seeing the extraordinary effects of the climate crisis across the world. So there's a real moment of universities demonstrating their ability to deliver public good, from the epidemiologists providing public policy advice for the pandemic, right through, of course, to the technologies and work tackling the climate crisis, of course, the development of vaccinations, but also including social mobility and all the other areas where universities make a difference to the world. Dame Nancy Rothwell, president of the University of Manchester, spoke to Times Higher Education, and she said that she believes passionately that the universities are here to address the big questions and challenges facing our world. And she said that the framework to do this, there's no better framework than the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They apply to all countries and all sectors of society. She believes universities exist for public benefit. And I do think the SDGs provide a remarkably coherent, clear framework of how universities can understand their impact on society. You have 17 completely interlinked goals. They are all multidisciplinary in the sense that actually you tackle several at once. They tackle things, of course, around science and technology as we look for new technologies to deal with climate, but they go to the fundamentals of equality in terms of providing access to basic education for the world, promoting gender equality, reducing inequalities, and of course, touching all the aspects of our lives that are under huge challenge. So it's a perfect framework that the world has united behind. And I think although universities don't get mentioned very much and higher education doesn't get mentioned very much within the goals, we are very clear at Times Higher Education that universities are fundamental to the delivery of these goals. And we're seeing that universities around the world are accepting this and understanding this. A very clear sense that universities are much more aware of their responsibilities to serve society. The Times Higher Education Leadership Survey, which we carry out each year, found a very large number of university leaders from all over the world agreed that the SDGs were informing how the university operated. A very similar number, even higher proportion, said that the SDGs were affecting the institution's research priorities over the next 5 years. Universities are focusing on the grand challenges, focusing overtly on the SDGs as part of their strategy. And students are also demanding this attention. This was a survey of 2,000 students that Times Higher Education's consultancy team carried out around sustainable citizenship. So students overwhelmingly said they believed in their own responsibilities as sustainable citizens. You can see there a high level of agreement, 79%, that it was important to them that they live their lives in a way that's consistent with the goals of sustainability. And then they said that they believe universities, 82% universities, have an important role to play in enhancing the ethic of sustainable citizenship in their students through teaching skills, practices, values. So they want to be sustainable citizens. They expect their universities to support them in that endeavor. And then they're also looking for measurements and metrics. Students are demanding to see that the universities are making that commitment. 57% said that it was most important to them to assess their university's commitment to diversity and inclusion when making decisions. A high proportion, admittedly, this was a survey conducted by Times Higher Education, a high proportion were looking at the THE impact rankings for evidence that universities are stepping up and demonstrating their commitment to the SDGs. So back in 2019, Times Higher Education decided to shake up the ranking space. We have almost 20 years of the world rankings, looking at those traditional elite universities that tend to be focused in the global north, tend to be focused in North America, in Western Europe, tend to be rich world institutions with very large research budgets, very large endowments in many cases. But we thought it was important that we understood that excellence comes in many forms. The diversity of the sector globally is a great strength. Not all universities will perform a role in society like Harvard. Universities are doing other wonderful things at the local, regional level, at the national level, or doing it outside of the research environment in terms of their teaching of new skills, their interactions with society. So we were delighted to introduce a new way of looking at universities, the impact rankings. It was notable as a really radical departure for university evaluation. The World Economic Forum here saying that the Times Higher Education Impact Ranking is the world's first global attempt to document evidence of universities' impact on society rather than just research and teaching. It's based on the 17 SDGs. So how do we do it? Well, we look at the what we call these 4 catalysts for change. We look at a university's research performance, of course, their creation of new knowledge, their inventions, their technological advancements that will advance the goals. They're helping the world to understand the challenges and problems of research into gender inequality, for example. So we look at the research environment. That is a way of, we draw the data from the Scopus database that Elsevier holds with a series of keyword searches that allow us to cluster research outcomes that are specifically relevant to each one of the individual 17 goals. We look at stewardship. It's not just about what research universities do, it's about how they manage their own affairs. What are they doing to make sure they treat their staff, their faculty fairly? Are they living the values of decent work, for example, one of the SDGs? Are they promoting gender equality? Are they promoting and reducing inequalities? So we look at what they do with their people in terms of admissions, in terms of jobs and careers and promotions within the university. And we look at what they do with their campuses, how they manage their own resources, large estates in many cases, big waste challenges, major energy challenges. So we look at the stewardship of their campuses as well as their people. Of course, we look at teaching. They're creating the next generation of citizens. Are they teaching sustainability within the curriculum? Are they producing graduates who will contribute to meeting the goals? For example, if it's zero hunger, are they producing universities into agriculture? If it's about health, are they producing qualified professionals for the health services? And finally, we look at outreach. Universities cannot do this in isolation. They have to collaborate with governments, with the private sector, with the charity sector. So we look at their links and their collaborations with the other sectors, the quadruple helix, as we call it, that are key to success in the SDGs: universities, civic society, businesses, and governments. And we look at every single one of the SDGs. So we create a ranking for each of the 17 goals. The goals themselves have a seriously clear set of indicators and targets. We have interpreted those indicators and targets to reply directly to universities. So we've created 105 metrics, 220 measurements to create the impact rankings. You can be ranked on any one of the goals if it's according to your niche priority areas or your specialist pockets of excellence. You can be ranked on all of the goals. And we will also create an overall ranking based on your top 3 goals. This is partly to do with being equal. It's not about how much resource you have to submit data, how many professionals you have in your team whose job it is to look at institutional data management and institutional research. It's about demonstrating that you're making a difference to the world, framed around the SDGs. So it's a very clear framework for universities to demonstrate their commitment to impact, their delivery of impact, but also to benchmark that commitment to impact and learn from one another. We're extremely proud of this new ranking. And just a final note, I'll wrap up so we leave plenty of time for the next speaker and of course for some conversation. The rankings have become extraordinarily powerful. They've only existed since 2019. In that first year in 2019, and participation is entirely voluntary. In that very first year in 2019, we had around about 500 participants. Now, just a few years later, we have more than 1,500 universities from 110 countries who have participated in the impact rankings. And we're actually just about now closing submission for the 2023 rankings, which we'll launch at the Global Sustainable Development Congress at KAUST University in Saudi Arabia in May next year. We have well over 1,700 entries. So there's a global movement, a new way of understanding excellence, a redefining of what excellence looks like, to be more inclusive, to be more diverse, and to embrace universities in the global south as well as the global north, and embrace the diversity of institutions in terms of mission, size, shape, history, heritage, wealth. So we're really thrilled to be part of this new movement, delighted to listen to the next presentation and to involve and engage in some questions in a moment or two. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen and look forward to hearing the next presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Phil. Next, we have Marisol Morales. She has her roots as a community organizer in Chicago and has been in the field of higher education community engagement for over 17 years. She currently serves as an executive director of the Carnegie Electives at the American Council of Education, Washington, D.C., working on deepening current electives and developing new ones. Her work and scholarships are focusing on issues of equity, people-centered system change, and liberatory praxis. Marisol's presentations is titled Carnegie Elective Classifications, Centering Public Purpose. So go ahead, Marisol.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Phil. I'm excited to be here. So let's get started. Oops, there we go. So what I want to start off with is a little bit of background and what's really grounded the work of the Carnegie Elective Classifications. This is a quote by Ernest Boyer, who served as president of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. And really this idea of what is the public purpose role of institutions of higher education. And so thinking about universities and colleges being among the greatest sources of hope for intellectual and civic progress in our country, I'm convinced that for this hope to be fulfilled, the Academy must become a vigorous partner in the search for answers to our most pressing social, civic, economic, and moral problems, and must reaffirm its historic commitment to the scholarship of engagement. So this was in 1995. In 1990, Boyer wrote a piece called Scholarship Reconsidered that really challenged institutions of higher ed to think outside the boundaries of research as the only function for institutions of higher ed, and really think about how we can look at these domains of scholarship to influence and support the public good. And this really becomes the seeds by which the Carnegie Elective Classification, particularly for community engagement, came out of. So the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching has historically been committed to the improvement of undergraduate education in the United States. The Carnegie classification, basic classification, was created in the early 1970s to distinguish mission differentiation, degree level, and specialization. And really this was a landscape analysis of the types of institutions of higher education that existed in the United States. Unfortunately, and really in an unintended way, these became measures for ranking within the United States higher education system, which was not what the foundation was interested in. The elective classification came about in the early 2000s, and really with the idea of differing from the basic classification, because the basic classification reports characteristics of an institution as it is, and the elective is intended to assist in the process of institutional change to improve educational effectiveness on campus. And really with this idea of how are they utilizing this mission to be distinctive. And, I often like to say the basic classification is the quantitative side of the house, where the elective classification is the qualitative. So earlier this year, for the first time, the universal classifications, the basic and the electives were housed in the same place, now at the American Council on Education. And again, the basic classification serves as this landscape analysis. And we are in the process of developing a social and economic mobility classification to sort of nuance our understanding of the landscape of higher education in the United States. The basic classification is developed through publicly available data, most of which comes from IPEDS, which is the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System that comes through the Department of Education for the United States. The elective classifications, we have two right now: community engagement, which is we have operating in the United States. Australia just launched this year, and then Canada will launch early next year. Leadership for public purpose, and we are in plans for developing additional elective classifications around sustainability, Indigenous serving, veterans, and incarcerated populations. So this is our suite of electives. And I'm very excited about the expansion of the community engagement elective outside of the United States. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. So really the framework is designed to respect the diversity of institutions and their approach to respective public purpose theme, whether it be community engagement, leadership, sustainability, and additional ones to come. It engages institutions in a process of inquiry, reflection, and self-assessment. And it honors the institution's achievements while promoting ongoing development of their programs. Some of the guiding principles for us as we reflect on our current electives and think about the expansion of additional ones are really to reflect manifestations of deep commitment to public purpose at the institutional level and elevate particular modes of public purpose into teaching, learning, and scholarly missions. It seeks to be a field force in the direction of continuous improvement, institutional transformation, and people-centered systems change. It's rooted in a clear definition of the classification theme. And I'll share a little bit later the definitions that we have for community engagement and leadership, which become, the basis for the evaluation that takes place. And there has to be an existing higher education field where the classification theme can be seeded and nurtured. This is really of and by the field, and I think that that's part of its strength. Institutions are motivated to participate in the elective classifications, one around institutional identity, so declaring their identity and their mission that distinguishes them from their peers. They're motivated through the process of the institutional self-assessment and self-studied, because we asked institutions to sort of bring siloed parts of the campus together to advance a unified agenda and identity across the institution. The level of accountability that it provides. It demonstrates that the institution is fulfilling its mission to serve the public good, as well as a new level of legitimacy, public recognition, and visibility of the work. And it also serves as a catalyst for change, fostering institutional alignment of public purpose, teaching, learning, and scholarship. And the framework itself, the application, really walks institutions through that process. Some of the review standards that we utilize for the classification, we do a holistic review. So there's not one piece of the application that will make or break. All of the evidence is considered as a whole. And there are not parts that are weighed more heavily than others. It does have to be, however, connected to the core academic work of the institution. There's foundational indicators, so reviewers will interested in looking at the foundational indicators as a clear indication of institutionalization of community engagement and creating a scaffolded application. There's a coherent institutional narrative. Reviewers look for a coherent narrative shaped by evidence that illustrates community engagement across the campus as a whole, not just segments of the institution. And then there's alignment, that there's not contradictory or inconsistent evidence provided. And reviewers are attuned to the misalignment in responses and really look towards that. Oops. So again, we have our 3 community engagement ones: Australia, the US, and Canada. And really, we piloted this before the pandemic in Australia and Canada, and really looked to not just do an Americanized version in countries outside of the US, but really how could they take the existing application and develop it to their own country context. The foundation was not interested in sort of exporting a US version of this, but really working closely with our partners in Australia and Canada to develop one that felt like it belonged to them, that belonged to them, that just used sort of the outlines and frameworks of the classification, but was meant to really reflect their own culture and priorities. In terms of the US classification, there are 356 campuses across the United States that currently have the community engagement elective classification, and we have representation across 49 states and territories. We have 16 community colleges represented. These are two-year institutions, and 79 minority serving institutions. These are both areas of growth for us in our interest to expand and focus on equity. We have a number of institutions since the classification itself began in 2005, was the pilot year in the United States. We have a number of classifications, 228, that are up for third time applications, so a second reclass. Applicants apply for the first time. They hold that classification for 6 years, and every 6 years then they reapply for the classification. So we have tons of data from around institutionalization from these campuses that are up for second reclass. And our second reclass represents 45 states and universities. From the 2020 cycle in the United States, there was a 61% attainment rate. So 61% of the applicants were successful in receiving the elective classification. And these are sort of the dimensions of engagement that we look for in the community engagement elective. Thinking about the civic mission of higher education, connecting to the community, improved teaching and learning, and the new production of knowledge. Our definition is the basis by which we review the application and what we train our campuses on. So thinking about this definition in terms of both the process and the purpose. So community engagement describes the collaboration between institutions of higher education with their larger communities, local, regional, state, national, global, for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. And if you remember from before, I mentioned about the importance of the definition towards grounding these applications. So there's two pieces to the community engagement definition. This one around the process of engagement, and our second one, the purpose of engagement. So the purpose of community engagement is the partnership of higher education institutions and the public and private sectors to enrich scholarship, research, and creative activity, enhance curriculum, teaching and learning, prepare educated, engaged citizens, strengthen democratic values and civic responsibility, and address critical societal issues and contribute to the public good. If you remember, this ties back very closely to what we learned from Boyer and Scholarship Reconsidered. We also were able to launch this year our second classification theme area, which is Leadership for Public Purpose, and we do this in partnership with Rice University that's located in Houston, Texas. And again, starting off with the definition, the leadership for public purpose definition is effective leadership for public purpose transcends functional or instrumental leadership, personal, career, political gain, or narrow business or organization outcomes in the pursuit of collective public goods like justice, equity, diversity, and liberty. So the evidence by which then these institutions will be evaluators contributing to the public scholarly understanding of leadership as a public good, preparing students for lives of leadership in their careers, communities, and the broader society, and developing leadership abilities in all institutional stakeholders. And so this particular elective classification is running for the first time now. It was piloted with 9 institutions, and so we'll see the broader impact that we have once the application cycle is closed. We have an online application process that institutions go through, and they typically have about a year and a half for this self-study. We also provide a ton of resources through our online platform called AC Engage to help support campuses in their application process. I often say that the process is the prize. We have seen from many institutions the value that going through the process of assessing their institutional commitment to community engagement, or now leadership for public purpose, has in transforming the institution, thinking about work plans, strategic plans, other things like accreditation, and how community engagement then moves to transform their institutions. In terms of the future of the electives, we're coming up on our 20th anniversary in 2025 for the community engagement electives. So our hope is to launch additional electives. Like I suggested, sustainability will be the next elective that we launch. Increase research utilizing the elective data. We have tons of research based on the institutions who participated in numerous cycles. And so looking to really think about the way that that data can be used to promote the work. We would really like to align the electives with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They're currently not aligned, but we see that as an opportunity, particularly as we expand the electives outside the United States. We will be hosting a summit in 2025 to celebrate the anniversary of the electives. And then we want to build community across the electives. As we're developing new elective themes, we believe that there's tremendous opportunity to think about public purpose more broadly and the way that these electives can help support that mission of public purpose across higher education, not only in the United States, but across the globe. And that's me. I'm finished with my presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marisol. Yeah, now we are going to move into a discussion, and I have, of course, questions for both of you, and then hopefully we can also see some questions coming through the channel. So, and in terms of your presentations, thank you both for both important, informative, and excellent presentations. So I have some questions that I'd like to start off with. So the first one would be maybe what opportunities do you see in combining the respective strengths of these two major efforts that you have already been presenting to evaluate universities like social responsibility capabilities and how they address the SDGs? How could this be like the strengths of both be combined? Who wants to start? Phil? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think from Times Higher Education's perspective, it is about putting as much of this information in the public domain as possible. So we have seen a process where universities, you know, have volunteered to go through quite an onerous process of sharing data, and we want to make sure we give that data back to the community to make sure that there is great value in it. You know, not only in terms of rewarding and celebrating the contributions they already make, which I think is very important in terms of sending out the message to taxpayers and politicians that universities have great societal value, that we must remind ourselves that universities are doing great, but also to try and ensure we use the data as one level benchmarking. Can you identify excellence in other institutions and potentially collaborate and partner with those institutions? But also, of course, I think in shining a light on previously hidden excellence. You know, we perhaps don't know from the very traditional monolithic rankings that there are amazing pockets of excellence in parts of the world that are often, you know, disadvantaged by traditional rankings or less well celebrated. So from my perspective, it is about saying that the data goes into the public domain and enters a landscape which gives universities tools to understand themselves, to find new partners, to highlight good practice, to identify good practice in terms of partnerships, and also to get that data to show the rest of the world, you know, corporates, governments, charities, where excellence might be found in terms of their investments, their decisions around partnerships. So for me, it feels like we're just entering a broader landscape of better and fresh data to understand impact. So very happy to collaborate. We have been working with UNESCO to produce white papers using the data, rejecting rankings and rejecting the concept of rankings, because that's always controversial, but drawing from the underlying data to understand what's happening out there and to really gain intelligence and provide insight. So we're very, very open to using the data collaboratively and to making sure it's as powerful as possible in terms of actually driving real change, not just a marketing exercise or a beauty parade. It's all about turning it into real change. So yeah, I'd be delighted to make sure it's as available as possible for collaboration and for institutions to use as powerfully as they can.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Marisol?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that for us, it is really about the institutional transformation piece and what can be developed in terms of collaboration between and amongst institutions of higher education. And so I think that the power of the elective classification is the ability to offer opportunities for deep self-study, to think about institutional transformation and connect with other institutions that are that share the same mission or commitment to public purpose. You know, I hope that it contributes to pushing against the competition model we have amongst institutions of higher education and really moves towards thinking about the ways that if we connect efforts, we can improve our society, right, locally and globally. And right now, what the rankings do to institutions are, you know, if they want to go from one status to another, they dedicate money towards things that don't actually improve the experiences for their students, right? Or that improve the local communities or contribute to this broader impact. And so our hope is that the electives will continue to create that space that pushes up against competition as the model for institutions of higher education and really moves us to spaces of collaboration.
And Lara, if I could
Thank
just address if you don't mind, I'd love to address the point around competition, because I think it's a really important point. I think it's absolutely correct that we need to move towards a more collaborative higher education sector. Obviously, universities and individuals have thrived on competition for years. You know, the Nobel Prize is often seen as a race, a very competitive environment. Competition for funding can often drive performance, but I agree we're entering a world where collaboration is more important. So in terms of the impact rankings, we do produce a ranked list. I think it's important to ensure that it gets leadership attention, media attention. The ranked list is a very powerful way of drawing attention to the activity. But we make it compulsory that universities take part in SDG 17, I beg your pardon, which is partnership goals. We actively reward their collaboration with others. And we really increasingly see the rankings as a beginning point of a collaborative process. It's identifying other pockets of excellence, identifying potential new partners for corporates and governments as well as other universities. So we are keen to see ranking pivot more towards being a tool for collaboration, almost matchmaking. Can the data be used for matchmaking? Can the data be used for discovery of excellence? So I agree with Marisol that rankings need to be much more sensitive and focused on how they support collaboration. But fundamentally, of course, there is a competitive rank list at the end, which I think is a really important way of focusing minds and attention. It does grab people's attention in a way that it's very hard to do in other cases.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Actually, I think it's good to take one question from the audience. It goes to you, Phil, but the question is, like Times Higher Education has been criticized sometimes, especially in Asia, for being Western-centric in your ranking criteria. How does the SDGs ranking differ?
Yeah, I think there's probably some challenges when you look at the very traditional world rankings. They do tend to, they've idealized this vision of a world-class university, bizarrely, that was actually, I guess, framed by China in the Shanghai Jiaotong academic ranking of world universities. The archetype of an excellent university was a large, comprehensive, research-intensive, and the Anglo-Saxon and North American model, you know, the post-war Johns Hopkinses and the Harvards of this world were idealized as the pinnacle. And of course, the English language is a major factor in terms of scholarly communication and there's a lot of challenge around language bias and things like publications and scholarly communication. So I accept that the traditional world rankings do tend to have a bit of a skew towards the West. However, having said that, we're seeing extraordinary change and progress of East Asian institutions in particular. And actually just literally 25 minutes ago, Times Higher Education published the prestige rankings, the reputation rankings, which is literally a ranking based entirely on academic perception of excellence, where university academics believe excellent work is happening. And for the first time ever, we have 2 East Asian universities in the world top 10, Tsinghua and Tokyo, and we're seeing Singapore rising, South Korea rising, China, mainland China in particular, rising. So we are seeing a change in the traditional rankings. But just to be clear, these new impact rankings, I think we're starting to see radical change because it doesn't privilege English language per se. There's a lower weight on traditional publication and traditional, usually Western edited academic journals. There's less weight on that. There's less weight on prestige and wealth. It's more about focused activity. So we're seeing a situation where in the world rankings, it's effectively US, UK in the top 10. In reputation terms now, it's getting much more diverse with much more recognition of East Asia. In the impact rankings, the diversity at the top is extraordinary. We have leaders, #1 ranked universities globally across different SDGs from Malaysia, from Thailand. We have a lot from the Middle East. So I think what's exciting is that the impact rankings do take away this idea that excellence looks like Harvard, or the more you look like Harvard or Oxford, the better you are. It's shattering that myth and saying, if you're doing something wonderful for your local community, providing skills and jobs in your community and supporting economic development in your community, that's fantastic. If you're providing a pocket of research that's helping to understand how we protect our oceans, that's outstanding. So it does really introduce a much more diverse range of winners and top ranked institutions, which I think is really healthy, because it shows you there's not a single version of excellence. It's not about how rich or prestigious you are. It is about what you're doing to change the world. And I love that about this new ranking, the impact rankings. They're more diverse and more valuable for that, I think.
If I can just add really quickly, one of the things that I particularly love about the elective classifications is that all kinds of institutions can play in the same sandbox. So we've got community colleges, we've got top research institutions all playing in the same field and learning from each other. So I think, one of the things we see, particularly in states that have different sort of tiers for their institutions of higher education, is that how does the electives classification, what is happening through these different types of institutions in different community settings, erase some of those unfortunate boundaries that I think exist and promote really this class structure of higher education, and then who gets access to these types of institutions and what's valued and what's not. And I think both kinds of things may need to exist in our higher education landscape, but the more we move towards collaboration, I think the better our institutions will be for it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And then it is actually maybe a relevant question also, and I start with you, Marisol. So what impact will social responsibility measures have on the types of jobs and positions created at colleges and universities?
Sure. I think that what we have seen from things like the Carnegie elective classifications, the growing field of community engagement, are positions within universities that are top academic positions, reporting to the president, chief engagement officers, right? That really try to connect different aspects of engagement that are happening at the institution. And so between sort of those top level higher ed administrator positions to engaged faculty, right? Folks who are being brought in with this kind of disposition and connection to their scholarly work. We see administrative staff to help support this work with communities. And we also see the development of student positions that can go into supporting local communities. So I feel like what this has introduced is an ecosystem of different jobs and positions at institutions of higher education that really then connect to institutional mission and purpose.
And if I could add, I would say, look, I think if anything really positive comes out of this in terms of specific roles, I think it is about centralizing and taking to the senior leadership the importance of sustainability and seeing it from a senior centralized position. We found that with people submitting to the impact rankings for the first time, they were telling us that actually they hadn't really sat at the center of the institution as a senior leadership team and fully understood the extremely broad depth of impact they were having. So having this framework was allowing them to really understand that at the central level, to record it and capture it at the central level, which I think puts it higher on the leadership agenda, makes it more central to a university's mission, which I think is obviously very exciting in terms of actually promoting real change. And then the other thing I hope might come of this, maybe being slightly too ambitious, is the idea that we have, I think, fallen into, and Marisol mentioned, the problems of competition. We've fallen into a very dog-eat-dog world for academic promotions. We all know about the problems of publish or perish and the sense of career development being based on maybe churning out more journal articles and chasing citations and being measured on grant success, and very challenging criteria that sometimes at the individual level becomes restraining. So I hope in some respects, by introducing more metrics and more ways of understanding universities' contribution to the world, we might find more sophisticated ways of measuring individual performance and rewarding and giving people career development. So in an ideal world, we reduce the sort of metricization of individuals and the putting of individuals into very narrow metrics-driven career paths, and find ways of celebrating other contributions and rewarding other contributions beyond the very narrow research production line. So I'd be excited to see that we can almost shine a light on the unsung excellence that exists, and the social and economic impact being made, and celebrate that and hopefully reward that and see that change of evaluation at the individual level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so
and I actually think that, just really quickly, I actually think that it contributes to the well-being of the participants. So, aside from like what happens with the career, like we know specifically from research in the United States about the kinds of faculty that are participating in engagement work. It's more faculty of color and more female faculty. And so the more we can create spaces for these folks to be recognized for this work that is not an additional burden or something extra that they have to do, I think we increase both recruitment and retention of these really important faculty to serve a diverse student body as well.
Yeah, and just sorry, I'll throw in another one, Laura, sorry to jump in again. What I think is exciting about this, the impact rank, is that they actively reward universities for best practice in their own recruitment and hiring and promotions processes. So with SDG on reduced inequalities and the SDG on gender, we will actively hold universities to account for the number of senior leaders who are female, for example, or the number of management faculty who are from minority ethnic groups. We'll also look at their admissions practices. Are they actually bringing in students from a more diverse range of backgrounds? So it's the metrics themselves are also encouraging universities to be more thoughtful about who and how they promote people.
Thank you so much. I have a question from the audience, and it's to either or both of the presenters. And the question is, do you have any experience or advice to encourage academics to link the research to SDGs?
Marisol, do you want to go first, or?
Sure. I would say that, specific institutions of higher education in the United States have made the commitment to the SDGs. What most of the community engaged scholarship are connected to them, even if they're not identifying them. specifically. And so I think for us, our pivot towards including them and making them part of how we talk about engagement across the field, particularly in the United States, is going to be really important for continuing to support and for scholars to see how their work already contributes to that, especially if their institutions are going, for the rankings with Times Higher Ed, right? So I think part of it is continuing the promotion within the United States and the field of community engagement to the connection with them.
Yeah, and I just add, obviously, in terms of we don't have a huge amount of evidence other than some of the broad data. So obviously we have the leadership data that says university leaders are increasingly overtly pivoting their research missions towards the goals. I think one of the pioneers there was University College London that several, maybe almost a decade ago, said, look, we're going to cluster our research towards specific grand challenges. So it wasn't the SDGs in total, but they would actually look at a very interdisciplinary way, say, look, we'll strategically cluster research groups, not by discipline, break down those disciplinary silos, but cluster them around problems. So increasingly, let's say climate would involve a very wide range of disciplines, including arts and humanities and social sciences, as well as those at the forefront of climate science. So you see that sort of thing at the leadership level, and we're seeing evidence more and more universities are pivoting in that way. And then the other one is, of course, we're now seeing some of these bibliometric suppliers, so the Elsevier's Scopus database and others, Web of Science, etc., Dimensions from Digital Science, which is the Springer Nature database. They're now using these keyword searches to cluster and understand publication output towards specific SDGs. And I think we can see significant increases in activity and volume of publications that are more overtly directed towards specific SDGs. So you can see it, you can see this surge of increased activity, and you can see this leadership. It's not really a pivot, but you can see this leadership focus. So I think it's very exciting that universities are really grasping this notion that they are there to make the world a better place. They do have really powerful social responsibility, and they need to demonstrate that and live those ideals.
Yeah, it makes me think the possibility of us going back through our applications and aligning some of the narratives and projects that institutions of higher ed submit in the applications to the development goals, because I think that from that we can actually pull a lot of really important data of what's been happening that maybe has not already been categorized as connecting to development goals.
So thank you both. So I have another question here. What have been strengths and limitations of both of these ranking systems to date? Like up to now, what has been the strengths and the limitations? And you have actually explained how this has an impact on the institutions, but what about the effects on other sectors as well? So Phil, would you like to start now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the impact side of things, on the ranking side, I think there are, we're really proud of this ranking, but there are clear limitations. I think one of the issues is around, in the early phases of this ranking, a lot of it's about a bit of a tick box approach. So we evaluate research and we see the impact of that research. We look at teaching in terms of production of graduates and commitment to various areas of teaching. We look at outreach, are you collaborating with governments, with NGOs, etc. But a lot of it is things like we ask people to demonstrate they have policies and processes. So, do you have a fair pay policy, gender equality policies? Do you have processes for, clamping down on and addressing, sexual misconduct or harassment or bullying? We've got a huge range of tick boxes around, do you have these policies in place? There's a lot of self-reporting. What we do is and of course, including issues around, net zero and targets around that. So we ask for the policies, and then we ask to see the policies, and we ask for evidence that the policies are in the public domain. And this is the beginning, because this is very much, it's only a 3 or 4 year old process. So the limitation is we then don't go to the phase of then evaluating the policies in terms of real meaty outcomes. Of course, we can see outcomes like your proportion of female leadership, the proportion of non-traditional students admitted, but we'd love to be able to push further and further. So the limitation is there, but also I think the limitation means that, which we could turn into a positive, means that the ranking is constantly nudging. It's constantly evolving to say, okay, well, if everyone reports they do have a net zero policy, let's start now assessing the timelines and the progress against that. So it's great in the sense that it's a very fluid ranking. It's not going to be set in stone. People do move a lot from one year to the next because we'll push boundaries, we'll nudge forward, we'll ask for more evidence. If institutions are doing things in terms of policy, we'll start holding them more to account for action. So it's a plus and a minus. It's an incredibly complex area to grasp hold of. But the minus is that there's quite a lot of instability in the ranking. But I almost think that's positive because it means it's constant change and constant attention, and we're constantly holding people to account. So not a very clear answer, but I think that's possibly the limitation we have.
Mm-hmm. Marisol?
Sure. For the elective classifications, I think that the strength is really this idea of being a field force. So the questions that we ask, particularly we ask questions about community engaged scholarship in tenure and promotion, right? And so institutions being able to look at their tenure and promotion guidelines and think about the ways that they create spaces for inclusive scholarship to be considered engaged scholarship. I think the strength, again, is that it is a narrative-based application. It's a self-study. It allows institutions to really go through this growth process and think about these different areas. And so, like Phil mentioned, ours also changes from cycle to cycle. And so depending on sort of what's happening in the world, what are some of the trends and themes that we're seeing emerging in the field, and really the ways in which we want to think about institutional transformation. I think the key to it being about institutional transformation, is one of its strengths. The other piece in terms of its strength, and what I've really seen in the expansion of the electives outside the United States, is really for these individual countries to think about what this means in their own cultural context and develop an application that speaks to that speaks to, in the case of Australia and Canada, really intentional language and questions about the inclusion of Indigenous populations, ones that we don't currently have in the US application. It means that the other strength is that there's communities of practice that develop around the electives. And so really thinking about, if collaboration is one of the goals and important values that we have for the elective, how are we creating systems of support for that collaboration to happen through these communities of practice? I think some of the limitations, it is an onerous process, right? Folks engage in a deep self-study. It takes about 1.5 years. Some institutions don't have the resources to dedicate to this. And so how are we addressing that through capacity building and through support for institutions of higher education who don't have large budgets around engagement, but are really doing important work with the community? I'd say another limitation is, in previous cycles, institutions held the classification for 10 years. We know that there's great leadership change that happens in 10 years. And so one of the ways that we've tried to address that has been institutions holding the classification for 6 years instead. And so being able to kind of come up every 6 years to think about what progress has been made around this. And lastly, because I sort of believe in a strengths-based approach, is that I think the strength of particularly the community engagement elective is that it actually can connect to the larger field of service learning and community engagement that's happening globally. And there's a lot more learning that can happen then across nations around this engagement work.
Mm-hmm. So thank you both. Being mindful of the time, we have 1 minute left for in our session. So any final words from you, Phil, if you would like to start?
Just thank you to all the universities who've engaged. I do believe we have an opportunity to create a new movement and a genuine rethink of what excellence is in higher ed, a much more diverse and inclusive vision of what excellence looks like. And hopefully we can really celebrate that through this exercise. So thank you to the 1,700 plus universities this year who've gone through the process to submit. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Marisol?
And I would sort of echo Phil's thanks to the USR network for hosting this, and to the participants. I hope that these become opportunities for real change in higher education across the globe. Our times dictate the necessity to do things differently, and I hope these create opportunities for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. So I have from the audience, thank you for amazing presentation. So I'm just going to share this, but also from me, special thanks to both of you and all that have prepared the conference and this particular session. And I also want to thank all that have joined here today. And we are actually running out of time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.